The sun had barely risen, casting a golden glow across the wide fields of the old ranch. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy smell of soil and the faint scent of hay. Birds were just starting to stir, singing their soft morning songs, and the quiet was only broken by the occasional lowing of the cattle. On the porch of the ranch house, Henry, the old rancher, sat in his worn rocking chair, sipping his black coffee slowly. His face was lined with years of hard work, but his eyes were sharp, clear, and full of a quiet determination. Henry had lived on this ranch all his life. From the time he could barely reach the fence, he had been learning the ways of the land, how to read the sky for weather, how to care for animals, and how to make the ranch thrive. He had seen many seasons come and go, many young men come and go, and yet the ranch had remained a constant in his life. His hands, rough and calloused, told the story of decades of toil, yet they were steady and skilled, capable of handling any task the day might bring. This morning, Henry was preparing for one of the biggest tasks of the week, the cattle roundup. It was not an easy job. The cattle were scattered over the large pastures, and it required careful planning, patience, and coordination to bring them back safely. Henry didn't rush. He believed that rushing often led to mistakes. Instead, he worked methodically, checking the fences, gathering ropes, and inspecting his horse, a loyal mare named Daisy, who had been with him for many years. Despite her age, Daisy was strong and intelligent, understanding Henry's commands almost without words. As he prepared, Henry noticed the dust rising in the distance. A small carriage was approaching the ranch. It carried Clara and her father, who had come to visit. Clara was young, confident, and full of energy. She had grown up hearing stories about ranch work, but had little experience herself. She was curious, bold, and often spoke her mind without thinking about the feelings of others. Today, she was particularly focused on proving herself and showing that she could handle any challenge thrown her way. When Clara saw Henry working alone with his equipment, she couldn't help but comment. "You're too old for this," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and skepticism. Her words carried a sharpness that made Henry pause for a moment. He took another sip of his coffee and looked at her with a calm smile. He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he studied her closely. She had the spark of youth, but she didn't yet understand the patience, the planning, and the experience that came with decades of hard work on a ranch. Henry remembered when he was young like Clara, full of energy but lacking wisdom. Experience, he knew, could not be rushed. It had to be earned through years of trying, failing, and learning. He had seen younger ranchers overestimate their strength and underestimate the land. He had seen them struggle to control the cattle, trip over equipment, or misjudge the weather, and yet, they often learned valuable lessons through those mistakes. Today, Henry thought, he would show Clara a different lesson, not about strength, but about knowledge, patience, and the quiet power of experience. Clara's father, standing beside her, nodded at Henry politely but said nothing. He had heard her comment, and he knew her well enough to know that she often spoke before thinking. Henry took this as a sign that he didn't need to argue. Actions, he believed, spoke louder than words. He finished his coffee, set the cup carefully on the wooden railing, and stood. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, but full of a quiet strength. The ranch was alive with activity now. Chickens clucked in the barnyard, a few dogs barked in the distance, and the cattle stirred, sensing that it was time to move. Henry called out to Daisy, and she responded with a soft neigh, trotting toward him as if she understood that today would be a busy day. Henry mounted her easily, his movements fluid despite his age, and began moving toward the fields where the cattle grazed. Clara watched him closely, curiosity mixed with doubt. She had never seen someone of Henry's age move with such confidence and purpose. "I still don't think he can keep up," she whispered to her father. Her father smiled faintly, shaking his head. He had learned over the years that Henry was not a man to underestimate. There was something about his calm, steady presence that made even the most difficult tasks seem possible. As Henry approached the cattle, he assessed the situation. A few of the animals were straying closer to the fence, nibbling at the grass at the edges of the pasture. Others were scattered further out, moving slowly in small groups. The task ahead was clear. He needed to gather them, guide them together, and move them toward the corral without causing panic or injury. It required skill, patience, and a careful understanding of the herd's behavior. Henry had spent a lifetime observing and understanding animals. He knew their moods, their habits, and their weaknesses. He whistled softly, a sound the cattle recognized, and began moving among them, gently guiding them toward the main path. His movements were calm, controlled, and deliberate. He didn't need to shout or rush. The animals responded to his confidence and experience. Clara, watching from a distance, began to feel a flicker of doubt in her earlier judgment. Could it be that age brought not weakness, but wisdom? Henry's mind was clear and focused. He thought about the day ahead, the tasks to be completed, and the potential challenges that might arise. He remembered times when a sudden shift in weather or a frightened animal had turned a routine roundup into a dangerous situation, but he was prepared. He had faced these challenges many times before, and his experience gave him a steady hand and a calm heart. Clara, still observing, began to notice details she had overlooked before. The way Henry spoke to Daisy, using soft commands and gentle nudges, the way he moved among the cattle, guiding them with a combination of patience and subtle authority, the way he seemed to anticipate every movement, every reaction, before it happened. She realized that what she had called too old was actually decades of knowledge and skill concentrated into a calm, confident presence. By mid-morning, the sun had climbed higher, warming the fields and highlighting the golden tones of the grass. Henry continued his work, slowly but efficiently moving the cattle closer to the corral. He didn't rush. He knew that haste often led to mistakes. His pace was steady, his movements precise, and his decisions thoughtful. Every step he took, every command he gave, was a reflection of years of experience and careful observation. Clara, unable to look away, felt a mixture of admiration and surprise. She had come to the ranch thinking she would see an old man struggling to keep up with the work, but instead, she saw someone who embodied skill, patience, and quiet determination. She realized that her initial judgment had been wrong. Age, she began to understand, was not a limitation, but a measure of experience and wisdom. As the morning continued, Henry prepared for the next stage of the roundup. The real test, he knew, would come when the herd needed to be moved through the more difficult parts of the pasture, where the land was uneven and the animals could easily panic. But he was ready. Every tool, every rope, every strategy had been considered. He moved with confidence, trusting in his experience and in the instincts he had developed over a lifetime of ranch work. Clara, standing a little way off, watched silently. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The lesson was unfolding before her eyes. Sometimes, she realized, it wasn't youth or strength that mattered most. It was knowledge, patience, and the quiet power of experience. And today, she would witness that power firsthand. By the time the sun reached its peak, Henry had successfully guided most of the cattle toward the main gathering area. His work was steady, methodical, and remarkably efficient. He moved with purpose, never faltering, never rushing, and never showing signs of weakness. His age, she now saw clearly, was not a disadvantage, but a strength. It had given him perspective, patience, and a skill that could not be rushed or imitated. And as Clara watched, a newfound respect began to grow within her. She realized that this day, which she had expected to be routine, was actually a lesson in humility, patience, and the power of experience. She had underestimated Henry, but he had shown her, without a single word, what it meant to be truly capable. Regardless of age, the morning ended with the herd mostly gathered, and Henry taking a brief pause to catch his breath and survey the work done so far. He looked toward Clara, who finally approached him, her expression a mixture of curiosity and respect. Today, The old rancher had already begun to prove that age was not a limitation. And the real test, the moment when he would fully demonstrate his skill, was still ahead. Henry took a moment to rest, letting Daisy graze nearby while he surveyed the fields. The morning sun had warmed the ground, and the soft breeze carried the faint scent of wildflowers and fresh grass. The cattle were mostly gathered near the center of the ranch now, but Henry knew that the hardest part of the day was still ahead. The terrain would become rougher, and a few of the more stubborn animals might try to wander off. He was prepared, though, because decades of ranch work had taught him that patience and planning could solve almost any problem. Clara followed him at a distance, her eyes wide with curiosity. She was beginning to understand that ranch work was not just about strength or speed. Every movement, every decision, and every step mattered. She watched as Henry approached the cattle again, speaking softly, almost whispering. The cattle responded, moving slowly but steadily toward the corral. It was a delicate balance. Push too hard, and they would panic. Push too little, and they might wander away. Henry seemed to know exactly how much pressure to apply. "See that?" Clara's father said quietly, noticing the way Henry handled the herd. "That's skill you can't learn overnight. Experience teaches it." Clara nodded, though she was still slightly in disbelief. She had assumed the older man would struggle at some point, but so far, Henry had proven her wrong. Every move he made was calm and purposeful. Even when one of the cows tried to stray toward the edge of the pasture, Henry intercepted it quickly, guiding it gently back with a soft word and a careful nudge from his staff. The day was progressing, and Henry decided it was time to move the cattle toward the more difficult part of the ranch. There was a narrow path leading to a larger pen, but it was bordered by uneven terrain, shallow ditches, and a few rocky patches. It required careful guidance, because if the cattle panicked here, they could get hurt or scatter. Henry mounted Daisy and rode ahead, positioning himself at the entrance of the path. His presence was commanding, yet calm. The cattle sensed his authority and started to follow without hesitation. Clara struggled to keep up. She tried riding alongside the herd, but Daisy's steady pace and Henry's gentle commands were hard to match. She began to see that this work required more than energy. It required understanding, timing, and a connection with the animals. Henry didn't rush. He anticipated each animal's movement, adjusting his position slightly, speaking softly to the cows and occasionally using the tip of his staff to redirect one that wandered too close to the rocks. It was a delicate dance, and he was leading it flawlessly. A sudden movement caught Clara's eye. One of the younger bulls had grown restless and was trying to break away. Panic could spread through the herd quickly if it wasn't managed. Henry noticed immediately. He didn't panic. Instead, he assessed the situation, positioning Daisy strategically to block the bull while guiding the other cattle safely forward. His voice was calm but firm, carrying a note of authority that made the bull hesitate. In a few minutes, with precise movements and careful commands, the bull was back in line. Clara couldn't believe her eyes. She had expected chaos, but Henry had handled it with ease. Henry's experience was more than just knowing how to control the cattle. It was knowing how to read them, understanding their moods, predicting their behavior, and using that knowledge to prevent problems before they occurred. He had spent decades observing animals, learning their habits, and learning to trust his instincts. Clara began to realize that this was the true advantage of age. Youth brought energy, but experience brought insight and foresight. As they moved further along the narrow path, the terrain became trickier. Small ditches, loose rocks, and patches of uneven ground made it easy for the cattle to stumble. One cow slipped slightly, and Clara instinctively reached to push it back. Henry shook his head gently, riding closer. "Let it find its balance," he said. "Panicking will make it worse. Stay calm, and they will too." She watched in awe as the cow regained its footing on its own, following Henry's guidance without harm. The lesson was clear. Calmness and patience often mattered more than force. Clara tried to match Henry's calm, speaking softly to the cattle as she rode behind them. It was harder than she expected. Her hands shook slightly, and her heart raced. but she began to understand the rhythm of the work. Henry's example had taught her that strength was not about rushing or forcing, but about understanding, timing, and gentle authority. She felt her respect for him growing with every passing moment. The next challenge came when a few cows noticed a small creek running along the path. Water often distracted the animals, and sometimes they refused to move past it. Henry anticipated this. He rode ahead calmly, positioning Daisy near the water and speaking softly to the cows. He didn't push them. He guided them. One by one, the cattle followed, trusting his judgment. Clara marveled at the ease with which he handled a situation that could have caused a major setback. As the morning turned into afternoon, Henry led the herd toward the final stretch. The corral was now visible in the distance, but one of the more stubborn cows refused to move. It was older and slower, and it had grown used to wandering freely. Henry dismounted, approaching the cow slowly. He knelt beside it, speaking in soft tones, using his hand to gently guide it toward the path. It took patience and persistence, but eventually, the cow followed him willingly. Clara realized that this was the key to his success: patience, respect for the animals, and trust in his own experience. By mid-afternoon, the majority of the herd had reached the corral. Henry signaled to the younger ranchers, who had been helping in the background, to begin guiding the last few animals. He stayed close, observing every movement, ready to intervene if necessary. Clara, exhausted but fascinated, rode alongside him. She had learned more in a few hours than she had ever expected. The ranch work was not just physical. It was mental, emotional, and required a deep understanding of life and nature. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, a gentle wind rustled through the fields, carrying with it the sounds of the ranch cows lowing, horses neighing, and the soft rustle of grass. Henry paused to take a breath, letting Daisy rest for a moment. Clara looked at him, admiration shining in her eyes. She had begun the day thinking she knew what ranch work was, but she had been wrong. Henry had shown her that true skill came not from youth or strength, but from experience, patience, and a deep connection to the land and animals. Henry didn't boast. He didn't need to. His work spoke for itself. And Clara, standing quietly beside him, finally understood what he had been proving all along. Age was not a limitation. It was a measure of experience, wisdom, and resilience. Every wrinkle on Henry's face, every scar on his hands, every careful movement he made told a story of a lifetime dedicated to the ranch, to the animals, and to the land. By late afternoon, the herd was fully gathered in the corral. The work of the day was not yet over, but the most challenging part had been completed successfully. Henry rode slowly among the cattle, checking each one, ensuring they were all safe and calm. Clara watched in silence, absorbing every detail. Learning lessons that could not be taught in a classroom or book, she realized that respect was earned through action, and Henry had earned hers completely. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, Henry guided the last few animals into the smaller pens for the evening. He took a moment to survey the work done. Everything was in order. The cattle were safe, the land was calm, and the day's tasks had been completed with skill and patience. Clara, exhausted but inspired, finally approached him. I didn't think you could do it," she admitted, her voice full of genuine respect. Henry smiled gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You just have to understand what you're working with," he said softly. "Patience, care, and knowing the land and the animals, those things matter more than rushing or showing strength. You'll learn it with time." Clara nodded, feeling a mixture of humility and admiration. She had come to the ranch to test herself, but she left with a newfound respect for the power of experience and patience. The late afternoon sun bathed the ranch in a warm glow. Henry, tired but satisfied, walked Daisy back toward the barn, checking the fence along the way. Clara followed quietly, observing every small task he performed. She realized that this day, which she had thought would be simple, had become a lesson she would never forget. The old rancher had proven not only his own ability but also taught her the value of patience, skill, and quiet determination. By the time the shadows grew long and the sky turned golden, Henry and Clara returned to the porch of the ranch house. The day had been long, challenging, and full of lessons. Henry sat in his rocking chair, sipping his water, while Clara leaned against the railing, reflecting on what she had witnessed. She understood now that being too old was never about weakness. It was about underestimating the power of experience, patience, and wisdom, qualities that could accomplish more than raw energy alone. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, and the ranch was bathed in a warm, golden light. Henry had finished the initial gathering of the cattle and was taking a brief moment to rest. Daisy grazed quietly nearby, her ears twitching at the soft sounds of the ranch. Clara was still nearby, her curiosity and admiration growing with every passing moment. She had learned so much about patience, skill, and respect for the animals. But she didn't know that the day was about to present a challenge that would truly test Henry's experience and determination. As Henry sipped his water, he noticed movement near the far edge of the pasture. A few of the younger cattle, likely startled by some noise in the distance, were beginning to stray from the herd. At first, it seemed minor, just a few animals wandering toward a fence that marked the edge of the property. But Henry's sharp eyes caught something more concerning. Beyond that fence, the land sloped downward, toward a rocky area, near a small cliff. Any panic among the cattle here could result in serious injury, and the situation required careful, immediate action. Henry stood, his movements deliberate, and gestured for Clara to stay back. "This is where the real test begins," he said calmly. "You watch and learn. It's not about rushing in, it's about thinking, predicting, and acting at the right moment." Clara nodded, feeling a mix of nervous excitement and respect. She had seen Henry handle the cattle calmly before, but now she sensed a tension in the air that she hadn't felt earlier. This would not be simple. Henry mounted Daisy and moved toward the edge of the pasture. His eyes scanned the herd, noting which animals were most likely to panic and which ones were still calm. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the faint sound of water from the creek below and the occasional call of a distant bird. Every detail mattered. Henry had learned long ago that a sudden noise, a movement in the shadows, or a misstep could startle the cattle. And once they panicked, controlling them became much more difficult. As he approached, one of the younger bulls, sensing the slope and open space, made a sudden dash toward the fence. Clara gasped. It was faster than the others, and it seemed almost reckless, charging toward the edge without hesitation. Henry didn't panic. Instead, he anticipated the movement, guiding Daisy in front of the bull's path, positioning himself so that the animal would naturally veer away from danger. He used calm, precise commands, and a gentle wave of his hand to redirect it. Slowly, the bull began to slow, following Henry's guidance rather than charging blindly. Clara watched, astonished. She had expected chaos, but Henry's calm, steady presence seemed to command respect from the animal. His voice was soft yet firm, carrying a note of authority that the bull could understand. He had learned, over decades, that animals responded not to fear or force, but to patience, confidence, and clear direction. Every step he took was calculated, every command carefully measured, and every decision guided by experience. Meanwhile, the rest of the cattle were beginning to notice the commotion. Panic can spread quickly through a herd, and Henry knew this. One wrong move, and the entire group could scatter toward the cliff. He positioned Daisy strategically, riding slowly along the edge of the group, guiding the more nervous animals toward the center, while keeping the bolder ones from straying further. His movements were smooth, deliberate, and unhurried, but they carried an undeniable authority. Clara tried to follow along on her horse, but it was difficult. She wanted to help, but she knew instinctively that interfering could make things worse. She watched as Henry's experience became clear. It was not raw strength or speed that controlled the situation. It was careful observation, timing, and the ability to anticipate each animal's reaction. She realized that what she had dismissed as too old was actually a lifetime of knowledge and instinct, honed through years of hard work and dedication. Suddenly, one of the cows slipped on a patch of loose soil near the slope. It tried to regain its footing, but began to slide slightly downhill. Clara's heart raced. She wanted to rush forward, to stop it herself, but Henry held up a hand. "Don't panic. Let it find its balance," he said calmly. "Panicking only makes it worse. You have to stay steady, and they will too." Clara watched as Henry guided Daisy closer, positioning himself just right so the cow could regain its footing safely. Slowly, carefully, it steadied itself and followed him back to safer ground. Henry's calm presence began to influence the entire herd. One by one, the other animals responded to his steady commands, moving away from the cliff and toward the center of the pasture. The younger bull, which had caused the initial scare, was now following Henry's lead, slower but controlled. Clara felt a surge of respect. She had underestimated him, and now she could see clearly why the ranch had remained in his hands for so long. His age was not a limitation, it was a source of wisdom, patience, and skill. As the situation began to stabilize, Henry continued guiding the cattle toward a safer section of the pasture. The terrain was tricky, with patches of uneven ground, small ditches, and scattered rocks. One wrong step could injure an animal, or even cause it to panic again. But Henry moved carefully, anticipating each challenge before it appeared. He spoke softly to Daisy, and she responded instinctively, positioning herself to help guide the cattle. Clara began to understand the importance of the bond between a rancher and their horse, and how that trust and coordination could make all the difference. The tension in the air was thick, but Henry remained calm. He had faced situations like this countless times before, and his experience allowed him to act with precision and confidence. Clara watched as he guided each cow, one by one, away from the dangerous slope and toward a safer area. Even the most stubborn animals, which had seemed impossible to control, were responding to his steady hand and quiet commands. Finally, the herd was mostly safe, but Henry knew the last few animals would require extra care. He approached them slowly, never rushing, speaking softly and moving with deliberate precision. Clara could see the focus in his eyes, the careful planning in every movement. He guided the animals patiently, anticipating their reactions and positioning Daisy to assist as needed. It was a delicate balance of timing, observation, and gentle authority. Clara, observing closely, realized that she had learned an invaluable lesson. Ranch work was not about rushing or forcing things. It was about understanding the animals, the land, and yourself. It was about patience, timing, and experience. And Henry, through decades of practice and knowledge, had mastered these skills to perfection. She felt a deep admiration for him, recognizing that the words she had spoken earlier were not only wrong but premature. As the afternoon wore on, Henry continued moving the cattle, ensuring each one was safe and calm. The situation had been tense, but his experience and steady hand had turned a potential disaster into a controlled, successful operation. Clara's admiration grew with every passing moment. She realized that being too old had nothing to do with weakness. It was a reflection of the years of skill, patience, and wisdom that could not be rushed or imitated. By late afternoon, the immediate danger had passed. The cattle were all in safer positions, and the worst of the panic had been managed. Henry rode slowly among the herd, checking each animal, making sure none had been injured or left behind. Clara followed, taking careful notes in her mind about every decision, every movement, and every command Henry had used. She understood that this experience would stay with her forever, a lesson she could never forget. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, Henry guided the final few animals back toward the central corral. His movements were deliberate, calm, and precise. Every step, every word, every gesture carried the weight of decades of experience. Clara, now riding more steadily, felt a growing sense of respect and humility. She had expected the day to be routine, but it had become a lesson in patience, skill, and the quiet power of experience. Finally, with the herd safe and calm, Henry dismounted and patted Daisy gently. He looked toward Clara, who approached him quietly. her expression a mixture of awe and admiration. "I didn't think. I mean, I thought it would be chaotic," she admitted softly. "But you handled it perfectly." Henry smiled, his eyes twinkling with quiet satisfaction. "Experience teaches you to see things before they happen," he said. "Patience, understanding, and steady hands can accomplish more than strength alone." Clara nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She realized that the day had been far more than a cattle roundup. It had been a lesson in life, patience, and respect. She had underestimated Henry because of his age, but now she understood that age was not a limitation. It was a source of wisdom, skill, and resilience that could overcome almost any challenge. As the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold, Henry guided the herd into the corral, ensuring that every animal was safe and calm. The day's challenge had tested his experience, patience, and skill. But he had succeeded, proving once again that determination and knowledge could triumph over doubt and expectation. Clara stood silently, watching, learning, and realizing that the old rancher had shown her the true meaning of strength, skill, and wisdom. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long, warm shadows across the sprawling fields of the ranch. Henry had successfully guided the herd away from danger, but he knew the day was not yet over. The final challenge lay ahead, the task of bringing all the cattle safely into the corral and ensuring each one was calm, accounted for, and ready for the evening. It was a task that required patience, careful observation, and an unshakable focus. And it would fully test Henry's skill as a rancher. Clara, following closely behind, felt a mix of admiration and nervous excitement. She had watched Henry handle every challenge so far with calm authority, and she knew that the next stage would be the true proof of his experience. She had underestimated him earlier, but now she understood that age had given him a lifetime of knowledge and insight. Every movement, every command, every decision he made was deliberate and precise, born from decades of experience. The herd was restless as they approached the final stretch toward the corral. The narrow path was lined with uneven terrain, scattered rocks, and a small creek running alongside it. A few of the younger cows were curious, wandering slightly from the path, while the older, more stubborn animals resisted moving too quickly. Henry assessed the situation calmly. He understood that forcing the cattle would only create chaos. Instead, he relied on patience, careful guidance, and his deep understanding of animal behavior. Dismounting Daisy briefly, Henry walked toward the more hesitant animals. He spoke softly, kneeling slightly to appear less threatening, letting his calm energy influence the herd. Clara watched in awe as the older cows began to respond, slowly following him toward the corral. Even the younger, more energetic cows seemed to sense his authority, their movements slowing as they matched his pace. It was as if Henry's calm presence radiated a quiet control over the entire group. Meanwhile, one of the bulls, which had caused trouble earlier, began to stir again. It pawed at the ground impatiently, glancing toward the creek with curiosity. Henry noticed immediately. He didn't rush or yell. Instead, he positioned Daisy strategically between the bull and the creek, giving the animal a gentle nudge while speaking softly. The bull hesitated, then followed his guidance, moving along the path rather than veering toward the water. Clara's eyes widened in admiration. She had never seen such quiet authority used with such effectiveness. Henry continued to guide the herd, moving methodically from one group of cattle to the next. He used his voice, his body, and Daisy's presence to create a rhythm that the animals could follow. He anticipated their reactions before they happened, subtly shifting positions to prevent panic, redirecting hesitant animals, and encouraging the more stubborn ones. Clara was amazed at how smoothly he worked. It wasn't about forcing the animals, it was about understanding them and guiding them with patience and care. As the herd neared the corral, a sudden sound from the nearby forest startled a few of the younger cows. They began to scatter slightly, their ears flicking nervously. Clara's heart raced. She wanted to help, but she knew that rushing in could make things worse. Henry, however, remained calm. He signaled to Daisy with a soft word, and she responded instantly, positioning herself to block the panicked cows and guide them back toward the path. With gentle commands and subtle movements, Henry restored order quickly, preventing chaos before it could spread. Clara felt a deep sense of respect growing within her. She had come to the ranch thinking she understood ranch work, but now she realized that there was so much more to it. It wasn't about speed or strength, it was about patience, observation, and understanding the animals. Henry had mastered these skills over a lifetime, and it showed in the effortless way he managed the herd. Every decision he made was calculated, every movement purposeful, and every command delivered with precision. The final stretch to the corral required even more care. The path narrowed, forcing the cattle into a single line, and the uneven ground made it easy for an animal to stumble. Henry rode carefully along the edge, guiding each cow into position. He encouraged hesitant animals with soft words, reassured the nervous ones with calm movements, and corrected the stubborn ones with gentle nudges. The rhythm he created allowed the herd to move steadily, safely, and efficiently. Clara noticed how Henry never raised his voice or lost his composure. Even when one of the cows stumbled slightly on a patch of loose soil, he didn't panic. He rode close, guiding the animal gently with his staff and Daisy's help, allowing it to regain its footing and continue along the path. It was a master class in patience, strategy, and control, and Clara could see why the ranch had remained in his capable hands for so many years. As they approached the corral, Henry signaled to the younger ranch hands who had been assisting. He coordinated their positions with subtle gestures and soft words, ensuring that no cow was left behind and that the herd remained calm. The final task required careful teamwork, and Henry's experience allowed him to lead effortlessly. Clara watched in amazement as the entire operation unfolded with precision, every animal guided safely into the corral without incident. Finally, the herd was all together. Henry rode slowly through the corral, checking each cow, making sure they were calm and accounted for. Clara followed, her admiration growing with each step. She realized that the entire day had been more than a cattle roundup. It had been a lesson in patience, skill, and quiet leadership. Henry had proven, without a single boast, that age was not a limitation, but a source of wisdom, insight, and authority. Clara approached him, her voice filled with genuine respect. I was wrong, she admitted softly. I thought you couldn't handle this. But you've shown me that experience matters more than anything. Henry smiled, his eyes twinkling with a quiet satisfaction. It's not about being fast or strong, he said. It's about understanding, patience, and respect. You have to see the land, the animals, and yourself clearly. Everything else follows. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the corral as Henry guided the last few animals into their pens. The herd was calm, safe, and secure. The task that had seemed so daunting earlier in the day had been completed successfully, thanks to Henry's experience, patience, and careful leadership. Clara couldn't help but feel inspired. She had come to the ranch with doubts and assumptions, but she now understood the quiet power of experience and the value of steady, patient guidance. Henry dismounted Daisy and walked slowly among the cattle, checking each one and ensuring they were settled for the evening. Clara followed closely, observing every small movement, every careful decision. She noticed how he anticipated problems before they happened, how he used subtle cues to communicate with the animals, and how he maintained control without ever showing frustration. It was a skill that could only come from years of practice, observation, and understanding. By the time the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with warm shades of orange and gold, Henry had completed his work. The cattle were safe, the land was calm, and the day's challenges had been met with skill and patience. Clara approached him, her respect and admiration clear. "You've taught me more in one day than I could have imagined," she said. "I see now that age is not a weakness. It's a strength." Henry chuckled softly, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Experience teaches you things that strength alone cannot," he said. "Patience, observation, and respect for what you work with, those are the things that matter most." Clara nodded, understanding the depth of his words. The day had been more than a test. It had been a lesson in life, in humility, and in the quiet power of knowledge and patience. As the shadows grew long and the sky turned a deep orange, Henry led the herd into their final resting pens. The cattle were calm and secure, and the ranch had returned to its peaceful rhythm. Clara stood quietly beside him, reflecting on everything she had witnessed. She realized that this day would stay with her forever, a reminder that true skill and strength often come not from youth or energy, but from experience, patience, and quiet confidence. Henry finally took a seat on the porch, Daisy grazing nearby, and Clara joined him. The day had been long and challenging, but it had also been a profound lesson. She looked at him with new respect, understanding for the first time the wisdom that came with a lifetime of work. Henry, content and calm, sipped his water and smiled faintly, knowing that he had not only completed the task but also passed on a valuable lesson to someone willing to learn. The sun set fully behind the hills, casting a golden glow over the ranch. The fields were quiet, the cattle were calm, and the day's work was complete. Henry had proven not only his own skill and experience, but also the value of patience, careful observation, and quiet determination. Clara, watching him, realized that respect is earned through action, and today, Henry had earned hers completely. The sky was painted in warm shades of orange and pink as the sun slowly disappeared behind the hills, leaving the ranch bathed in a gentle evening glow. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of hay, grass, and the soft sounds of cattle settling into their pens. Henry sat on the porch of his ranch house, his hands resting on the railing, his gaze sweeping over the fields he had worked for decades. Daisy grazed nearby, and the once restless herd now moved calmly, content in their safe enclosure. It had been a long day, but Henry felt satisfied. Every task had been completed with care, every challenge met with skill and patience, and the ranch was as orderly and calm as it had ever been. Clara, standing beside the porch, had finally found a moment to breathe. She had spent the entire day following Henry, observing every move, every command, and every subtle decision. Her admiration for him had grown with each passing hour, and now she fully understood what she had failed to see that morning. Age was not a limitation. It was a measure of experience, patience, and wisdom. Henry had shown her, through his actions and his calm presence, what it truly meant to be skilled, capable, and resilient. Clara took a deep breath, her eyes reflecting both exhaustion and wonder. "I never thought I would see anything like this," she said softly. "I thought ranch work was all about speed and strength. I didn't realize it was about everything you've shown me today. Patience, understanding, and knowing exactly what to do before a problem even happens." Henry smiled, his face calm, his eyes twinkling faintly in the evening light. "That's right," he said gently. "It's not about rushing, and it's not about who can work the fastest. It's about thinking ahead, reading the land, reading the animals, and keeping calm no matter what happens. That's the difference experience makes. And every year of work, every small lesson, every mistake, teaches you something that strength alone cannot." Clara nodded slowly. She realized that she had learned more than just how to manage cattle that day. She had learned a life lesson, one that applied not only to ranch work but to everything she might face in life. She had underestimated someone because of age, she had doubted his ability, and she had been proven wrong. But more importantly, she had learned to respect experience, patience, and quiet confidence, qualities that were often overlooked in favor of speed, energy, and boldness. Henry rose from his chair and walked toward Daisy, patting her gently on the neck. "The work is done for today," he said, his voice calm. "But the lessons never end. Every day on the ranch teaches something new, if you're willing to pay attention." Clara watched him carefully, absorbing his words. She realized that this was the essence of what he had been trying to show her all along. True skill and strength were measured not in physical power alone, but in patience, observation, and the ability to stay calm and focused in difficult situations. As the evening deepened, Clara asked Henry questions about his work, about the ranch, and about the lessons he had learned over the years. He answered patiently, sharing stories of his youth, of challenges he had faced, and of mistakes that had taught him invaluable lessons. Clara listened intently, realizing that every wrinkle on his face, every scar on his hands, and every deliberate movement was a testament to a lifetime of learning. She felt honored to witness this wisdom firsthand and to understand its value. The ranch, quiet and peaceful now, seemed to glow in the fading light. Henry walked along the fence, checking that all the gates were secure and that the cattle were calm. Clara followed closely, noting how he moved carefully, yet with confidence. Every step, every glance, every decision was deliberate. She realized that this careful observation, this attention to detail, was what had made him so successful and respected. The ranch was not just a piece of land. It was a living, breathing ecosystem, and Henry had learned how to work with it, rather than against it. As they returned to the porch, Clara spoke again, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "I understand now why people respect you so much," she said. "It's not just because you're strong or skilled. It's because you know what you're doing, and you do it with patience and care. You've earned respect through your actions, not your words." Henry chuckled softly. "That's true," he said. "Respect is never demanded. It's earned, day by day, through hard work, honesty, and steady action. Anyone can shout or try to prove themselves, but real respect comes when you consistently show your ability through quiet, careful effort." Clara smiled, realizing that she had just witnessed this principle in action. The entire day had been a demonstration, a living example of what it meant to lead with experience and integrity. The evening grew cooler, and the first stars began to appear in the sky. Henry and Clara sat on the porch in silence for a few moments, enjoying the peacefulness of the ranch at the end of a long day. The wind rustled softly through the trees. The distant sound of cattle settling added a gentle rhythm to the night, and the world seemed calm and orderly. Clara felt a sense of gratitude. She had come to the ranch with doubts, assumptions, and a desire to test herself, but she left with a deeper understanding, respect, and appreciation for the quiet power of experience. Henry finally spoke, his voice calm and reflective. "Remember, Clara, life is a lot like the ranch. There are challenges, obstacles, and moments when things seem chaotic, but if you stay calm, observe carefully, and act with patience and thought, you can overcome almost anything. Strength alone will not get you through. It's how you use your mind, your knowledge, and your patience that counts." Clara nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She realized that the lessons she had learned today would stay with her forever, shaping how she approached challenges in the future. As the night settled fully over the ranch, Henry rose and walked inside to prepare a simple meal. Clara followed, eager to continue listening to his stories and insights. They sat at the wooden table, the warmth of the house contrasting with the cool evening air outside. Henry shared tales of storms he had weathered, animals he had rescued, and mistakes that had taught him more than successes ever could. Clara listened with rapt attention, each story reinforcing the lessons of the day, the importance of patience, careful observation, and respect for what you work with. After dinner, Henry and Clara stepped outside once more. The moon was rising, casting a soft glow over the fields. The ranch was quiet, the cattle resting peacefully, and the world seemed to hold its breath in calm serenity. Clara felt a deep sense of peace. She had witnessed something rare and valuable today, the quiet strength of a lifetime of experience, the patience and wisdom that only time can bring, and the true meaning of skill and respect. Henry looked out over the fields, his face calm, his posture relaxed. "It's days like this," he said softly, "that remind you why the work matters. Not for glory, not for recognition, but for the satisfaction of doing things well, of meeting challenges with skill and patience, and of earning respect through consistent effort." Clara nodded, feeling that she had understood this lesson more deeply than any she had learned before. The night grew deeper, and the stars sparkled brightly above the ranch. Henry and Clara finally returned to the porch, sitting quietly together. The day had been long, filled with challenges and lessons, but it had ended in understanding, respect, and quiet satisfaction. Clara realized that she had been wrong to judge Henry based on his age. He had proven, through action and patience, that experience, wisdom, and steady determination could accomplish more than raw energy alone. Henry looked at Clara and smiled. "You'll learn more each day, if you pay attention," he said, "and one day, you'll see that respect and skill come not from proving yourself to others, but from quietly doing your best and learning from every experience." Clara smiled back, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and admiration. She knew she had witnessed something truly special, a living example of what it meant to combine patience, skill, and wisdom, and to prove, beyond doubt, that age was never a limitation. As the night deepened, Henry finally stood and stretched, feeling the pleasant fatigue of a day well spent. The ranch was quiet, calm, and orderly, just as it had been when the day began. Clara watched him, knowing that she had learned more in one day than she could have imagined. The lessons of patience, observation, skill, and respect would stay with her forever, shaping how she approached challenges, people, and life itself. The stars sparkled above, the wind whispered softly through the trees, and the ranch rested peacefully. Henry sat back in his rocking chair, Daisy nearby, content with a day of hard work completed successfully. Clara leaned against the railing, reflecting on the day's events, feeling inspired, humbled, and grateful. The old rancher had proven not only his skill and experience but also the quiet power of patience, wisdom, and determination. Age was not a weakness, it was a strength, and Clara had witnessed it fully. And as the night wrapped the ranch in calm serenity, both Henry and Clara knew that the day had ended not just with work completed, but with lessons learned, respect earned, and a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to face challenges with patience, skill, and quiet confidence. The old rancher had proven, once and for all, that age was no obstacle when paired with experience, wisdom, and determination.